Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak has been found guilty in all 7 charges of corruption in the first of 5 cases linked to the 1MD State Fund. Najib faced these charges in relation to SRC International and allegations that millions of dollars ended up in his personal bank accounts. He has also become the first Malaysian Prime Minister to be convicted in a criminal court. Iraq says 3 Katyusha rockets hit Camp Taji military base, which houses US-led coalition forces in northern Baghdad. In a statement, the Iraqi military said a helicopter was damaged in the strikes. The military mentioned there were no casualties. The worldwide number of COVID-19 deaths has crossed 652,000 with over 16.4 million cases. In the US, 1,057 more people have died, while over 54,000 have tested positive in the last 24 hours. The country's death toll has exceeded 148,000, while infections tally nears 4.3 million. In Pakistan, 23 more people have died, with the death toll rising to 5,865 with 936 new cases. The tally of nationwide infections has crossed 275,000. New Zealand has suspended its extradition treaty with Hong Kong over China's new national security law for the territory. Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters says Wellington cannot trust that the country's territory's criminal justice system is independent of Beijing. Responding, the Chinese embassy in New Zealand called the decision a serious violation of international law and interference in the country's internal affairs. And the West Indies will be looking to survive the last day of their 3rd Test match against England when play resumes today at Manchester's Old Trafford. Windies were struggling at 10 for 2 as day 4 of the match was completely washed out by rain. The series is currently level at 1-1 each. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now. Former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak has been found guilty in all 7 charges of corruption in the first 5 cases linked to the 1MDB State Fund. Najib faced these charges in relation to SRC International and allegations that millions of dollars ended up in his personal bank accounts. Criminal charges came only after Najib's defeat in the 2018 elections, when his successor Mahathir Mohamad reopened investigations. He has also become the first Malaysian Prime Minister to be convicted in a criminal court. This comes just days after Goldman Sachs reached a $3.9 billion deal with Malaysia to drop criminal charges over its role in the scandal. Based on publicly filed accounts, 1MDB has nearly $11.73 million in debt. Moving on, Iraq says 3 Katyusha rockets hit Camp Taji military base, which houses US-led coalition forces in northern Baghdad. In a statement, the Iraqi military said a helicopter was damaged in the strikes. It said the rockets were launched from Sabah al-Bor neighborhood and fell on an area of the base used by Iraqi forces. The coalition said none of its personnel were injured in the raid. The rocket strike is the latest in a long-running series of low-intensity attacks on military bases in Iraq. No group has yet claimed responsibility for these strikes. The worldwide number of COVID-19 deaths has crossed 652,000, while over 16.4 million cases. In the US, 1,075 more people have died, while over 54,000 people tested positive in the last 24 hours. The country's death toll has exceeded 148,000, while infections tally nears 4.3 million. More in this report.
With hundreds of thousands getting infected every day across the globe, the World Health Organization has warned the pandemic is accelerating. California is the latest of the U.S. states that have now run out of healthcare facilities and professionals as cases hit the roof. After Brazil and Mexico suffering the worst in Latin America, cases and deaths in Venezuela are now rising to unprecedented levels. But the country, already reeling from an economic crisis, has limited options when it comes to reimposing restrictions.
Venezuela is in default with the bank for just over $700 million. The rules of the bank mean that when there is a default of that size, there is absolutely nothing we can do.
The second wave of the new coronavirus is now gripping Europe as countries reimpose several restrictions. Calling London's 14-day quarantine decision unjust, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez appealed to the regional countries not to cut travel ties.
Before we reproach each other, let's try to find a balance where, above all, the British authorities base their decision on the cumulative incidents, that is to say, on the evolution of the epidemic in these territories which are tourist destinations, which I insist are safe for British tourists.
China recorded 68 new cases, the highest daily figure since April, due to clusters in 3 separate regions. In Indonesia, the total number of cases has topped 100,000. Over in Australia, while the pace of the outbreak in Victoria refuses to slow down, new clusters emerging in Belmur have added to the government's worries.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 88% of COVID-19 patients have recovered so far, as the country sees a sharp decline in new cases. The Health Ministry said 23 people have died, while 936 infections were detected in the last 24 hours. The ministry said the countrywide death toll has risen to nearly 6,000, with over 275,000 confirmed cases. It said there are nearly 27,000 active cases in Pakistan, among which 1,217 are in a critical condition. The southern province of Sindh is the worst hit, with nearly 119,000 cases, while Punjab has reported more than 92,000 infections. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has stressed the need for multilateral cooperation by the global community to fight the COVID-19 crisis. He said this in a video message to the Quadrilateral Conference of Pakistan, China, Nepal and Afghanistan. Qureshi said the efforts must not have religious, ethnic boundaries. China's Foreign Minister Wang shared the virtual mood, which was aimed at proposing a joint response to the pandemic. The Quadrilateral Summit vowed to work together to tackle the crisis. U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad is arriving in Pakistan today to seek Islamabad's support for the intra-Afghan negotiations. It has been 5 months since the U.S. and the Taliban signed a peace deal in Doha, agreeing to participate in the talks. But the dialogue has been delayed due to Kabul's reluctance to some of the Taliban prisoners as stipulated by the pact. Our correspondent Isa Naqvi from Islamabad has more details.
Since the signing of the historic Doha deal, there has been little progress in bringing the warring sides to the negotiating table. In a bid to bring the decades-long war to an end, the US has fulfilled its promise of reducing number of its troops in Afghanistan. It has also withdrawn its forces from 5 military bases. But the release of Taliban inmates by the Afghan government seems to be the real bottleneck in the peace process.
I think primarily the Afghan government has been driven by a sense of insecurity, deep sense of insecurity, which made it relent on the promise of release of 5,000 prisoners. And to date, it remains the sticking point. The majority of prisoners have been released, but I think President Ashraf Ghani and his associates want to preserve their central role in any future setup.
Experts believe some regional powers want to sabotage the peace process in Afghanistan.
After the Americans and the Taliban they arrived at an agreement, then we could see very clearly that India was losing ground in Afghanistan. Now, this is the fear of losing that control. This is the fear of losing all those years which they had put it in Afghanistan. It is because once the Americans leave, it would be extremely difficult for India to carve out a role for themselves in that part of the world.
Islamabad believes the Doha peace deal is a historic opportunity to bring peace to the war-torn country.
Pakistan has always believed that lasting peace will only come when intra-Afghan dialogue takes place. And the agreement, Doha agreement, is a critical step in that path.
Experts say it is a decisive moment in the history of this region and would carve the future of South Asia. Reporting for Indus News, Isa Naqvi, Islamabad.
Now moving on, China says it firmly opposes comments from Australia that Beijing's territorial claims over the South China Sea is unlawful. During a daily briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said Beijing has a legitimate historic right to energy-rich waters. Wenbin said China's claims will not be altered by groundless accusations by certain countries. China claims 90% of the waters, but Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan and Vietnam also lay claim to parts of it.
China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea were developed throughout the long course of history. They are upheld by successive Chinese governments in conformity with international law.
Well, this comes last week as the Australian government filed a declaration to the United Nations rejecting China's maritime claims. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said China's claims are inconsistent with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Well, now moving on, New Zealand has suspended its extradition treaty with Hong Kong over China's new national security law for the territory. Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters says Wellington cannot trust that the territory's criminal justice system is independent of Beijing. He said if China adheres to one country, two system principle in the future, New Zealand will rethink its decision. Responding, the Chinese embassy in New Zealand called the decision a serious violation of international law and interference in the country's internal affairs. Beijing said any attempt to pressure China on the issue of Hong Kong will not succeed. Canada, Australia and the United Kingdom earlier suspended their extradition treaties with Hong Kong. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Yemen's Prime Minister says the international community should take strong action against Houthi blackmailing over a decaying oil tanker. Prime Minister Ma'in Abdul Malik Saeed said the rebels have reneged on promises to allow UN experts to board the tanker. Saeed urged the UN Security Council to put maximum pressure on the rebels in order to avoid an environmental disaster. He said his government will comply with all solutions that will lead to emptying the tanker. The safer tanker is carrying more than 1 million barrels of crude oil and is stranded off Yemen city of Hudaydah. Earlier, the UN warned that the stuck tanker poses a serious threat to marine life and livelihood of thousands of people. Now, Hezbollah has denied Israel's claims that its fighters tried to infiltrate the border near the occupied Golan Heights. In a statement, the group said it did not engage in any clashes with Israeli troops. It said Israeli forces moved nervously due to a tense situation in the area after the killing of one of its fighters in an airstrike in Syria. Earlier, Israel's defense forces said they fired on 4 Hezbollah fighters who crossed the border. After the reports, authorities have imposed a lockdown in the Israeli-occupied Syrian Golan Heights. In 2006, Israel and Hezbollah fought a full-fledged war that took place mostly on the Lebanese soil. Now, West African leaders have called for the establishment of a unity government in Mali to resolve the country's political crisis. This was proposed by the Economic Commission of West African States during an extraordinary virtual summit on Mali's crisis. In a statement, the bloc hopes that the plan will be implemented within 10 days. The meeting comes days after mediation efforts by the presidents of 6 African countries in Mali's capital failed to end the deadlock. For weeks now, Mali's President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta has been locked in a tense standoff with an opposition protest coalition. The movement is demanding the president to step down over the country's economic distress. Moving on now, Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin have discussed the recent developments in the war-torn Libya and Syria. Turkish Communications Ministry said Erdogan and Putin talked on various issues on a phone call. The ministry said both leaders agreed to maintain cooperation and dialogue over bilateral relations and regional issues. It said Erdogan and Putin also discussed the recent escalation between Azerbaijan and Armenia. The two presidents stressed that there are no alternatives to diplomatic settlement of the conflict. The Kremlin said Putin stressed the importance of prevention of any actions promoting further escalation in the region. Now, Russia says there is no need to revive an obsolete platform such as G8. This comes a day after Germany turned down US President Donald Trump's proposal of adding Russia back to the group. In a statement, Deputy Chairman of Russian Security Council Dmitry Medvedev said nothing can be discussed without having India and China at the table. Medvedev said the existence of G7 is questionable when there is G20 and other international frameworks. He said Crimea and Ukraine are being used as an excuse not to restore the G8. Now, Pakistan has achieved another milestone in the field of science and technology. After made in Pakistan ventilators, the manufacturing of Pakistan-made drones has also been completed successfully. More in this report by our correspondent Sumaira Khan.
Pakistan's Minister for Science and Technology Fawad Chaudhry has been a strong proponent of the Made in Pakistan initiative. He pledged to turn the country into a technological power while examining locally developed multifunctional drones in Islamabad. The minister said Pakistan is set to announce its drone policy and a regulatory body soon to enhance the aerial vehicles production.
Drone will be the most important agriculture implement in coming days. So we have we had no drone policy. So we started work on drone policy. We worked with these companies. We worked with the NRTC, which is a defense production company. So now we have about 4 to 5 major private companies who are now in drone manufacturing. And we are encouraging them to come up with the new models in agriculture drones.
In the first phase, 30 drones will be delivered to police to assist sensitive surveillance. The Agricultural Department will have its share in this chunk to help authorities eliminate locust swarms.
The implementation of drone surveillance on motorway may start in 6 months. So we will have the major area of motorway covered by drones in like 6 to 8 months. So likewise, the Islamabad police will get drones in this year. So it will start this year, and I hope within 3 years we will have the major, the drones will be playing a very major role in police surveillance and agriculture side.
The minister also highlighted Pakistan's untiring efforts towards self-reliance during testing times of the coronavirus pandemic that are now being stretched to help other countries in need of medical equipment. With the significant launch of agricultural drone, officials in Pakistan are confident that Pakistan will be unstoppable and self-reliant in attaining any kind of drone technology in the days ahead. Reporting for Indus News, Sumaira Khan, Islamabad.
Muslims in Pakistan are all set to celebrate Eid al-Adha on Saturday, but business is not robust for cattle traders. People who usually buy sacrificial animals ahead of the festival are going online rather than to the markets to make the purchases due to COVID-19 concerns. More in this report.
Every year ahead of Eid al-Adha, people including children swarm markets to purchase cattle. But amid the coronavirus pandemic, the government has imposed social distancing restrictions, including a half-day closure of the cattle markets. This has led to a drop in customers to the markets set up on the outskirts of urban centers.
Last year, the cattle market was open 24 hours. This year, the time has been reduced to 12 hours, hampering our businesses. We are very worried. The customers don't turn up during the day because it is hot. In the night, the government have disallowed the customers. Due to this, we are very worried.
At the markets, sanitizing gates have been installed and authorities are advising people to wear masks. The rules and concern have made customers switch to online markets. More people are paying charities to slaughter cattle on their behalf and deliver their cut to them or donate it to the needy.
We slaughter 500 cows and 5,000 goats every Eid al-Adha. Due to the pandemic and lockdown, people's interest in online bookings has increased. In just 30 days, we are almost fully booked. This used to take 2 months in previous years.
The number of COVID-19 cases has sharply declined in Pakistan since the implementation of Prime Minister Imran Khan's smart lockdowns. Not just that the new cases have dipped, nearly 88% of all patients have recovered as well, but the concerns haven't subsided yet.
Well, stocks in Asia Pacific are trading mixed as investors continue to monitor developments on the coronavirus front. Shares in South Korea led the gains among the region's major markets, with the Kospi up more than 1%. Shares of industry heavyweight Samsung Electronics rose more than 4%. Mainland Chinese stocks are also trading up, with the Shenzhen Component gaining over 1%. Over in Japan, stocks lagged the overall region as the Nikkei 225 and Topix index dipped fractionally. Australia's ASX 200 also slid marginally. Overall, the MSCI Asia ex-Japan index added close to 1%. Now, the West Indies will be looking to survive the last day of their third Test match against England when play resumes today at Manchester's Old Trafford. Windies were struggling at 10 for 2 as day 4 of the match was completely washed out by rain. At stumps on day 3, Craig Braithwaite and Shai Hope remained unbeaten on the crease. Earlier, England declared their second innings after putting 226 runs on the scoreboard, giving the visitors a target of 399 runs. Both the openers Rory Burns and Dom Sibley, as well as skipper Joy Root, scored half-centuries. The 3-match Test series is evenly poised at 1-1 each. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.